I've got a list here because my mind is just jumbled. If I don't have a list,
I should do the same thing.
Then I will not. I will not cover the questions I wanted to ask you. So I'm getting back to this. On economies of scale, do you think there's a difference in revenue per hive for a small beekeeper versus a large beekeeper?
Yeah, it should be higher for the small beekeeper.
Really?
Well, it should if you're trying to make a living, or it really should, because you are theoretically squeezing more out of every colony. You're selling retail perhaps instead of wholesale, so the gross income should absolutely be higher. Now, profit margin, that's a different subject.
Yeah, because the bigger beekeeper, the economies of scale favor the cost cutting. You're spreading your truck and your extractor and your building and all those costs over more hives, which are all producing income.
Well, I'll tell you what happens in this business. We have three ways of looking at our profit. Retail, we're making probably averaging 75% over cost. In other words, a dollar turns into $1.75.
Yeah.
Wholesale, it's around 20 to 25%. In other words, a dollar turns into $1.22, let's say. And if you look at our overall business, the big picture, our profit margin's been running around 11%. So it just depends on how you're looking at it. But obviously, if you're retailing, your profit margin is much greater, but you're working a lot harder to make that amount of profit.
Exactly. I want to talk about revenue and margins. You've got independent retailers, gift shops, and pharmacies, and health food stores, and things like that. You've got low barriers to entry because you can just go in and meet the owner. There's higher margins. They can command a higher price, but they're going to sell a lower volume of honey more than likely.
I like to say there's two ways to make money: sell less for more, or more for less.
Yeah.
We shoot for the middle ground.
So my strategy so far has been to build relationships with good retailers who can get that premium price. They're hard to find, but they've got low barriers. Now, as I get bigger, I'm going to need to find some higher volume players, and that's grocery stores. And they've got high barriers to entry. There's so much paperwork.
Yeah, I like to say, when I went into Walmart, this gets way off subject, and you can edit it out if you want, but it's really a story of what happened to me. When I was standing in a Walmart store on my way back from South Georgia in a bee suit, walked into the Walmart store. All I wanted to do was look at the honey on the shelf and compare their prices to what I was doing. And as I was standing there looking, a man walked up and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm just window shopping," and I gave him one or two lines to explain what I was really doing. I was honest. He says, "Oh, so you're a local beekeeper?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "I would love to have some local honey in this store." I said, "Well, I'd love to put honey in Walmart." He was the manager. He wasn't even the grocery manager. He was a store manager. He said, "It's really hard to get into Walmart." He said, "It takes about a year to go through the paperwork." And he said, "But I'll help you." He said, "I'll help you go through all the hoops. You just call me when you hit a roadblock and we'll get it done." So I said, "Okay." Well, about 3 or 4 months into the process, we'd gotten signatures from regional managers and district managers. All the stuff was coming together. And I got an 8 carbon copy, 6 or 8 page contract from Walmart. I didn't even know what they were asking for. It was written by corporate lawyers for corporate lawyers. And right then, mentally, I gave up. I said, there's no way I can do this. Well, about a month later, I got a call from Walmart headquarters, and it was a woman who was in her department was this process. And she said, "I see that we haven't got such and such back from you." And I was just completely honest with her. I said, "Ma'am," I said, "I think I've hit a brick wall here that I'm not going to get past." I say, "I don't even know what these questions mean, let alone how to answer them." And she kind of sighed for a moment. She said, "Well," she said, "it's pretty quiet right here. I've got about a half hour. Let's see if we can get through this." And one by one, that woman took me through all the questions and answers and told me what to answer and how to write it. If it wasn't for her, I never would have made it into Walmart. That woman got me into Walmart. I never would have made it. It was crazy. I didn't even understand the questions. I had no clue what they were even asking. Yeah.
The
Now,
generosity.
somebody smarter than me, you have a higher education. You might have understood the language better than I did, but I was hopeless.
I don't speak lawyer.
Yeah, well, this wasn't even lawyer. This was corporate lawyer. It was crazy stuff.
So, going into grocery stores, you're dragging a paper trail 10 foot long behind you for
Yeah.
each product that you put into
Yeah.
a grocery store. Is this better for a small producer than it is for someone your size? Is it? I know that you have to have a third party inspection and all this stuff,
Well,
but
yeah.
did you always have to have the third party inspection?
No, when I stepped into Walmart, that happened.
Okay.
You know, when I was dealing with the little local chains like Quality Foods here in this area, they have 13 or 15 stores. I didn't have to go through that. Even Ingles doesn't. I've never been asked for it from them, but the three businesses that we deal with that insist on it are Walmart, Costco, and Kroger's. Those are big players, of course. Kroger's is the fourth largest grocery chain corporation in the country, perhaps the world, but people don't know it because a lot of their stores are named something else, not Kroger's.
City Market and
Yeah,
out
whatever.
west.
Yeah. And we co-pack for people that are asking for a copy of that third-party inspection. In fact, we have it coming up on February 21st, and every time I get anxious about this because there's so much work. The books on that bottom shelf, that's only about 20% of the books that are going to have to be finalized and cleaned up by the time I get ready for this audit. It's more about paperwork than it is, real cleanliness, although that's absolutely necessary. The big part of this third-party audit is the paperwork. It's tremendous. It's scary. It's scary.
How important is it to the smaller grocers that you're able to give them a year-round supply of honey?
It's very important. Let's stop for a moment with the big people. I cannot run out of honey for Walmart or Kroger's because the moment my shelf is empty, they'll put something else there.
Yeah.
And suddenly my barcode is out of the system. You just can't go there. You can't let it run out. Now with a smaller grocery store, they're more flexible. You can say, well, sourwood honey is seasonal. We'll have it for 6 months, but then they'll be out. And they're okay with that. We have a local store here. He understands it, no problem. You can't do that with Walmart.
So you can't even put that product into them.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
Now, if you're smart and you're good at the game, I'm sure you can do this because Walmart does deal with local producers, obviously. They'll have watermelons for a few months and suddenly they're gone. But I'm not sophisticated enough to know how to play that game, so I could probably hire somebody to play the game for me, but I'm not sure I'm big enough for that either.
Yeah.
So that was a long answer for an easy question. Short answer is when you get bigger and you have to find avenues to sell large quantities of product, you're going to have to get into the corporate game, that's the thing I hate the most about what I'm doing is playing this corporate game. I'm a beekeeper. I'm not I don't have a business PhD. That's not me.
Yeah. So looking at income sources in beekeeping, you've got honey, and I'm breaking this out into income source, income potential, and then what I think the associated risk is with those. And we're going to talk about the diversification that you've hinted at. So retailing honey, you've got a really good income potential there, especially in gift shops and stuff like that. You've got good margins. The risk associated and the effort to get it is fairly high.
Well, let's pause for a moment. You call that retailing. That's somebody else retailing.
Yeah. Well, you're wholesaling to them.
So we're retailing here,
Yeah.
and we're wholesaling out of this business.
Yeah.
So the biggest income will come from literally retailing. If you can have a stand in your front yard or go to the farmer's market.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention there.
I am imprecise in my language.
That's okay.
I tend to call that direct sales. Me direct to the customer, but it is a retail sale. So wholesale is what I'm talking about because you can move more volume and you're using their labor and their location and their rent.
And when you get into 500, 600, 700 colonies, 1 or 2 man outfit, that's what you're really going to be doing is wholesaling by the case. That's going to be your niche.
Yeah. So you've got a good income potential in wholesaling to those niche retailers, the smaller retailers, the risk associated with that is high, and the effort in it is high. And the reason I say that is you're not going to make a good honey crop every year. So if that's your only income stream, then you're going to have some bad years.
And maybe there's two ways of approaching that. Maybe you need to be careful with your honey crop. You get a bumper crop, maybe you don't want to sell all that honey in the season. Maybe roll some over into the next season to help buffer the potential for a bad crop. Because you're right, if your stand isn't full in the Piggly Wiggly, they're going to find somebody else to fill it.
Yeah.
So that's a concern. I have managed to offset that problem with buying honey from other people. Like if you go to my honey stand in Kroger's, it absolutely has a bunch of honey that's produced by me, but it also has honey from Florida, orange blossom, blueberry from somewhere else. So, and if I have a good crop, suddenly you'll see more of my honey on the stand, and if I have a bad crop, perhaps you'll see more of the other honey on the stand. So there's a way of doing that. Now suddenly you're not only a producer, but you're a packer, you're a producer-packer.
Yeah.
So that's the way I play that game.
Every time I go to a store in my in-laws live in Canton, and I'll go to Kroger there, and there's a Bob Binnie stand of honey, and I go buy it, and I'm like, oh, I don't have any basswood, so I'll pick up some basswood.
How much basswood is produced in Georgia? Probably not a lot. We do get some up north of the shop, and occasionally we do put basswood of our own in there, but that particular basswood is from Wisconsin.
Yep. So bulk honey, low barrier to entry. It's just put it on a truck and send it.
Yeah. The
income potential's quite a bit lower than retailing or even wholesaling.
But that could be a way to bridge the gap from going totally in business and making your business better over the years. You can get into this 500, 600, 800 colony category, but not have developed your wholesale trade yet, but you can bulk it out for the meantime while your wholesale trade builds. And so it is a way to get established and to be business full time. It's just to bulk it out.
Pollination, pretty good income potential. It's early in the season, can be, but there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to do with your outfit. I have friends that are pollinators, honey producers. That is all they do. And the pollinating gives them the ability to weather the storm if it's a poor production year. Now, if you want to get into producing bees early, packages and nukes and queens, and you want to go that route, pollination can actually get in the way. Let's keep going back to Chris Werner, but let's use him as an example. He doesn't send all his bees to California. He can't, because first of all, he has an interesting statement. He says, "Don't ever send more than you can afford to lose to California," because it could happen.
Yeah.
That's a different subject, but true. But he'll send a few loads, perhaps. John Knox sends 2 loads, and the rest stay home to split and make nukes and go for Florida honey production. Okay, so that's just almond pollination. It's hard to look at that much money and say no. People have to be aware that stuff does go wrong. You are gambling a little bit. That's why Chris says don't take more than what you can afford to lose. Because I've known people that have lost their shorts going to California for a variety of reasons. You can get sprayed and you can come out with ill bees. You can get stopped at the border because they spotted one fire ant on a pallet. They'll turn you around or make you unload and pressure wash the whole load, which is very hard on the bees. Trucking disasters can occur.
Yeah.
Perhaps the crop runs late. You thought you were going to get your bees on the 20th of March, and you've promised somebody 500 nukes by the second week in April, but your bees aren't back yet. I mean, you really need to look at this closely. And then on the West Coast, I did a lot of pollination. I pollinated almonds, then pears in Oregon, and then cranberries on the Oregon coast. Perhaps some cherries in the Willamette Valley, and when I was with Glenn, I'd go up to the Washington apples on the eastern side of the Cascades in Washington State before we went to North Dakota, and that really worked. But trust me, every step along the way, the bees were taking a beating, Every time you load bees on a truck long distance, you can count on losing 5 to 10% of your queens. It really takes a rest period of a week or 2 or 3 before the bees are in condition to make a honey crop. So, it's just you got to assess the risk all along the way. At this point in my career, because we're selling bees and we're trying to produce local honey, which now suddenly has a much higher value than it did just 5 years ago, I'm choosing not to go anywhere. I think I'm better off keeping my bees home, keeping them healthy, not beating them up on the road, not beating the equipment up on the road, not going through that stress, just staying home and concentrating on the other aspects of my business more, this diversified stuff I talked about. And I pollinated in Georgia for a little while and took a beating every single time. I finally just said, I'm done with this. Every time the bees would come out in less healthy, in a worse state than they went in. And the growers, in many cases, just consider your bees collateral damage. They don't relate, they don't empathize with your situation. It's just, you're the beekeeper, I'm paying you, you can afford to take a little loss. That's just the way they look at it. Blueberries is a good example. Too many fungicides and garbage being sprayed on them blueberries. I don't know a single beekeeper, well, I'll take that back. I know 2 or 3 that state they come out of the blueberries in good condition, but the majority of the beekeepers I know that go into Georgia blueberries come back with worse bees than they went in. Now what? Now are you moving on to a gallberry crop and you got to get your bees healthy again? I'm just choosing not to go down that road anymore. I think it's hard on the bees, it's hard on the comb, it's hard on the equipment, and I choose to diversify in other directions rather than pollinate. Does that mean pollination isn't legitimate and it might not be the road for you? Absolutely, it could be the road for some people. It's just not my road anymore.
I think there's a lot of context around that, and there's a lot of specific knowledge. You've got to have clean pallets. You've got to make grade once you get there. You probably need to be working with a broker. There's got to be labor to work the hives while they're out there. And if you're staying home or if you're going, or there's just a lot of unknowns. So that there's barriers to entry to even get into it.
There is, and there's one more thing I should try not to forget to state here, and that is that if you're going to do 3 or 4 pollinations a year, in order to keep your bees in a reasonable state, they need a rest period between each step. It's not just the trucking. They could be being exposed to other, even minor degrees of chemicals, and it doesn't even need to be spray on the plant while you're there. It can be the bees collecting what we think is morning dew in the mornings. The plants are sucking up chemicals out of the earth, and what we think is dew is actually kind of a perspiration by the plant. And you get a little bit of that, a little bit of your miticides in the comb, and a little bit of fungicides in the almonds, and maybe a little bit of pesticides in the apples, and suddenly you've got a toxic soup going on. And the best way to try to survive that is to give your bees a clean out period, a rest period, a period where they can get healthy and clean before they go on to the next onslaught of issues, chemicals and stuff.
That's interesting. It's like a boxer preparing for a fight. They eat real clean, live real clean, and then they go get beat up.
Get beat up and then take a rest. That's the one way that it can work long term. And also, if you're pollinating that at that level, you really need to consider replacing your comb more often, because you're going to have many more chemical contaminants that your wax is holding on to. Someone like you and me that's out in the boonies, it's not as much of a concern, but if you're pollinating 4 crops a year, in 6 or 8 or 10 years, you probably need to be getting rid of that comb.
I don't intend to be a migratory beekeeper. I don't really intend to do pollination. I don't want to.
It's hard work.
Not to say I never will, but I don't really want to.